Magic the Gathering is a highly complex and intricate game. With a comprehensive rulebook that is literally 286 pages long, and hundreds of new cards entering the game every couple of months, it's a wonder that we can play the game at all. The design team at Wizards of the Coast do their best to simplify it with keywords and other shortcuts, making cards simple for a Magic player to quickly understand. But despite this philosophy of simplification, many Magic the Gathering cards are just complicated. There's just no way around it. Maybe the wording is hard to parse, or maybe the card just does something that requires some explanation. Or maybe the card looks simple at first glance, but when you actually think about how the card works in a real game of Magic the Gathering, the rules questions become actual nightmares. In this video, I've compiled 5 of the absolute most complicated, complex cards in Magic the Gathering history. There may be more complicated cards out there, but, well, these are, I feel, 5 of the biggest headaches. Now, when many Magic the Gathering players think of complex Magic the Gathering cards, they tend to think of old cards with clunky wording or otherwise poor templating. But when you verbally explain what those cards do, turns out many of them are actually not that complicated. For example, Animate Dead is a headache to read, but that's only because it's hard to actually write out what it does in the language of Magic the Gathering rules. Much of Animate Dead's awkward text box is dedicated to its ability to go from enchanting a creature card in the graveyard to enchanting a creature card on the battlefield. The reason it's templated this way is because it has the enchantment subtype Aura. So, according to the rules, it has to target something when it is put on the stack. Since it's a reanimation spell, that means it has to have enchant target creature card in a graveyard. However, when a card changes zones, it's considered a new game object with no memory of what it was before. That means that to follow that creature to the battlefield, it needs a triggered ability to become an aura that can enchant creatures, and to attach itself to that creature. But though its wording is complex, what Animate Dead is actually doing is not. And in practice, Animate Dead is far simpler to explain than this wordy templating would have you believe. Think about it. Animate Dead is an aura enchantment that brings a creature back from the graveyard and gives the creature -1, -0. If Animate Dead leaves play, sacrifice the creature it's enchanting, and vice versa. See, what the card does is not actually that complicated. The list I've put together for this video forgives old cards for their templating sins, so you won't find any cards like Animate Dead on this list. Likewise, if a card has a weird or wordy text box, but the actual effect isn't that complicated, then it won't make the list. So no, this list does not include Goblin Games or Planeswalker's Mischief or any other nonsense cards from Plane Shift. And lastly, I want to move past some of the most classic complicated card examples. So no, we're not talking about Shahrazad or Chains of Mephistopheles. Everyone knows those cards are ridiculous. It's best not to beat a dead horse. I really want to dig into the truly, genuinely complicated of the complex. So with all that in mind, let's dive right in. But first, speaking of complicated, computer programming and coding. What a valuable skill, but it's nowhere near as easy as a game of Magic the Gathering, though hang on a second there. Just think about all that's going on in the average game of Magic the Gathering. You're memorizing complex combo lines, you're learning complicated cards, you're remembering what's in your deck and what it's supposed to do, hopefully, and you learn all of this just by playing a great game over and over and over again. Why can't coding and programming be that easy? Well, actually it is, thanks to sponsor of today's video, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is an innovative learning platform designed to teach you back-end web development from start to finish. While Boot.dev teaches you valuable programming skills in Python and Go, it looks and feels like a role-playing game. That's right, learn programming by leveling up, earning XP, and completing quests, all while doing actual programming tasks. So you're having fun and learning a marketable skill at the same time. After all, the best way to learn coding is by getting in there and, well, coding. Boot.dev is designed to keep you creating as much actual code as possible to set you up for success. I also feel compelled to let you know that if you're ever stuck on a lesson, a bear wizard named Boots will help guide you to the right solution. What other learning platform can say that? Best of all, every boot.dev lesson is viewable in guest mode, so you can try before you buy and make sure it's right for you. The founders of boot.dev are passionate gamers themselves, and they're committed to helping their students prepare for today's programming job market in a fun and practical way. So if you're interested in picking up a valuable skill or even an exciting new career, click the link below and use my code Tolarian to get 25% off your first payment for boot.dev. And depending on what subscription you choose, that can be 25% off your first month or even off your entire first year. Wow, what a savings. Check it out and begin your training today. Thank you, boot.dev, for sponsoring today's video. First up is an honorable mention, gracing the list because of an ability that can break the rules of Magic the Gathering if implemented as it was originally written. This isn't an obscure card either. In fact, it would likely be a legacy staple if the card existed on Magic Online, but unfortunately due to, licensing issues, thank you very much Universes Beyond, Warhammer 40k cards aren't on Magic Online, and probably never will be, but no, that's another video. For this video, let me say Triumph of St. Catherine is a fantastic card with a very strange rules interaction. Triumph is a 5-mana, 5/5 life-linking white creature that really only costs 2 mana if you miracle it. It's also got a sweet recursive ability, though that ability is the primary source of the card's complexity. Presidium Protectiva. When Triumph of St. Catherine dies, exile it and the top 6 cards of your library in a face-down pile. If you do, shuffle that pile and put it back on top of your library. Except that's not actually what Presidium Protectiva does, because if that's what it actually did, then the card would break the game of Magic if your opponent gains control of your Triumph of St. Catherine. If they controlled your Triumph and the Triumph died, they'd have to exile it and the top 6 cards of their own library face down. Then shuffle them with your Triumph and put the pile of 7 cards where exactly? They can't put it all on their library because the Magic rules prevents cards from going into libraries of players who don't own them. But the rules text on Triumph clearly says the pile is shuffled face down and put into the card's former controller's library. So do you have to shuffle the pile, then determine which of the cards is the Triumph so that you can put the Triumph on top of your own library while the other 6 cards go back on top of your opponent's library? If so, you better hope you and your opponent have different color sleeves. In actuality, Wizards of the Coast avoided this issue retroactively by giving Triumph an errata. Its ability now says, when Triumph of St. Catherine is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, which means if it dies while controlled by your opponent, it just dies, since it doesn't go into their graveyard. Instead, it goes into yours. Of course, you'd only know that if you knew to go looking for the Oracle text, because in this instance, reading the card does not explain the card. One more thing to keep in mind with Triumph. If you have fewer than 6 cards left in your library, your Triumph of St. Catherine dying will deck you. Why? Because of this line of text. If you do. When Catherine dies, you try to exile 6 cards from the top of your library. If you have fewer, you exile as many as you can, and then the if you do will check if you exiled 6 cards. If not, you don't shuffle the Triumph of St. Catherine or the exiled cards back into your library, which means your library is now empty. Similarly, if your Triumph is removed from your graveyard in response to its ability, such as with Endurance or Surgical Extraction, the top 6 cards of your library are exiled face down permanently, because you can't exile the Triumph from your graveyard to its own ability, and therefore can't meet the requirements stated by if you do. Fun, but not simple. Alright, number 5 on this list is a card I wish wasn't vintage legal. Not because the card is too good for vintage, or even good enough to see play in vintage, but because why does this card have to be legal in sanctioned formats at all? It's the principle of the thing. All right. That's not the subject of this video. I'm speaking, though, of course, of everyone's favorite, Space Bellerin. Remember him? Space Bellerin is a 4-mana Jace Planeswalker in Azurius colors with the static ability Space Sculptor, which means Space Bellerin divides the battlefield into Alpha, Beta, and Gamma sectors. If a creature isn't assigned to a sector, its controller assigns it to one. Opponents assign first. Got that? No? Okay, good, because I don't understand either. I just didn't want to be the first one to say it. This might be the first reminder text ever printed that doesn't actually explain what the hell the ability does. Space Bellerin divides the battlefield into these 3 sectors, and you control Space Bellerin, so presumably you're the one designating the sectors, right? Right? Wrong, because of the last sentence in the reminder text. So creatures are assigned to sectors by their controllers, but that sentence starts with the clause, if a creature isn't assigned to a sector. So who's assigning the sectors initially? Reading the novel that is Space Bellerin's official rules clarification page, it turns out the initial assignment of creatures to sectors is indeed dictated by the creature's controllers. Oh my god, just look at all of this to try and understand one part of what one card does. Okay. The reason it's worded like this is because it's conceivably possible for 2 Magic the Gathering players to have a Space Bellerin in play. In that instance, the second Space Bellerin to hit play wouldn't change the sector assignments for creatures already assigned to sectors. Additionally, any new creatures that enter the battlefield are assigned to sectors by their controller. If, theoretically, 2 Space Bellerins were to enter play at the same time, say in one of the silliest plays of all time, 2 players at a commander table both flip Space Bellerin off Guff Rewrites History, then players who don't control a Space Bellerin assign their creatures to sectors first in turn order. Then those who do control a Space Bellerin assign in turn order. Now these examples aren't written on the card, of course, but it is written in the rules clarification because, dear God, it is possible for multiple players to have a Space Bellerin in play. Sectors only matter insofar as they pertain to Space Bellerin's loyalty abilities, which thankfully are much easier to understand than the Space Sculptor keyword, once you do indeed understand the Space Sculptor keyword. Tick up to make creatures only able to block other creatures in their own sector, tick down to pump all creatures in a sector of your choice, and ultimately to destroy all creatures in a sector of your choice. Essentially, Space Bellerin is a power-crept version of Raging River, a card complex enough in its own right to warrant a spot on this list if it weren't overshadowed by this spacey planeswalker. Because his loyalty abilities affect all players' creatures in your chosen sector, the playability of Space Bellerin is limited to just Unfinity Limited, if that. Therefore, it's unlikely you'll ever have to play against a Space Bellerin in real life. Space Sculptor lives only in our nightmares. Number 4 is the strongest card on this list, and it's also the most elegantly designed card on the list. Despite its elegance, however, this card is incredibly complicated. Actually, the card's elegance is the complexity of the card, as it can only be appreciated once you realize how complex the card is. Urza's Saga is, to date, the only enchantment land in Magic the Gathering. As an Urza's land and a saga, Urza's Saga is also an Urza's Saga. That is, its card name is also its subtypes. See, it says it right on the card. Urza's Saga, enchantment land, Urza's Saga. So many things had to line up in Magic history for this card to exist. The Urza lands, mine, Power Plant, and Tower had to be printed in Antiquities and gain enough notoriety to receive reprints in future sets. The set Urza's Saga had to be printed and be so disgustingly broken that it was burned into the memories of every Magic player for the remainder of time. Urza's had to become a land subtype in 8th edition. Saga had to become an enchantment subtype in Dominaria and become popular enough to be worth becoming a permanent subtype in Magic. And finally, the first Modern Horizons, which in addition to printing cards directly into Modern, was also a celebration of Magic history, had to be successful enough to warrant a second Modern Horizons, where the card Urza's Saga was finally born. So, elegant and evocative design aside, Urza's Saga also creates some complicated rules interactions. Because it's a land in addition to a saga, it's the only saga in Magic that naturally gains activated abilities. This creates a ton of weird rules interactions. First off, it's a land that taps for mana, but only after its first chapter ability resolves. Which means if your opponent points instant speed land or enchantment removal at your Urza's Saga in response to its trigger, then you'll have wasted your land drop and gotten nothing out of it. The second point of rules complexity with Urza's Saga is the card's third chapter. Specifically, because sagas are sacrificed after their last chapter ability leaves the stack, you can activate Urza's Saga's other abilities to make a mana or construct before you lose it. The third complex aspect of Urza's Saga is one that isn't even that complicated, but it did trip up a lot of players when the card was first printed. There is a subtle difference between a mana cost of 0 or 1, generic mana, versus a mana value of 0 or 1. You can search up a Tormod's Crypt or Amulet of Vigor with Urza's Saga, but you can't go find a Chalice of the Void, engineered explosives, or portable hole. Finally, perhaps the most complicated aspect of Urza's Saga is how it interacts with certain land hate effects like Blood Moon and Spreading Seas. These effects, once in play, instantly destroy the saga to state-based effects without you having a chance to respond. You may remember me doing that exact sick play against Andrea Mengucci when I faced off against him in our legacy episode of Shuffle Up and Play.
It's a Tide Shaper.
No.
When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target land becomes an island.
The land becomes an island, all of a sudden finishes all the chapters, and because it doesn't have any more chapters on it, dies. Something like that. I'm gonna be sorry to all the judges at home if I didn't explain it well.
Fortunately, I hired an expert team of Magic the Gathering researchers to look into it, and it turns out the answer is this. When a card turns Urza's Saga into a mountain or island, it loses its other abilities, but it does not lose its other subtypes, such as Saga. Sagas have the inherent rule that when they have more lore counters than chapter abilities, they must sacrifice themselves. When Urza's Saga loses its abilities, it loses all its chapters. Therefore, if it has 0 or more lore counters, which it always does, it immediately sacrifices itself to state-based effects. Got it? No? Well, unfortunately, I can't explain it any clearer than that, so hopefully it makes enough sense to you. And if not, just do like the pro players do. Don't worry about why it happens, just let it happen. While Andrea Mengucci, one of the greatest Magic the Gathering players in the world, was able to explain it fairly well there, if you were to ask the average modern player why this happens, there's a good chance they'd just say, I don't know, it just does. And if you asked the comments section of that video, most people would say Andrea Mengucci was wrong because the card didn't make sense to them, because they have an incorrect understanding of the card and naturally assume they know better than Andrea Mengucci. Ha ha ha, silly comments section. Number 3 on this list is like Wheel of Fortune, if Wheel of Fortune wasn't fun at parties. That's right, it's Wheel of Misfortune, a red sorcery with the same casting cost as Wheel of Fortune, but 1/10 the comprehensibility. Wheel of Misfortune reads, each player secretly chooses a number 0 or greater, then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number. Each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. Okay, so everyone picks a number. If you pick a number too high, you're likely to deal yourself a bunch of damage. But if you pick a number too low, you might not get to wheel away your hand. If you know you don't want to discard your hand, it's probably optimal to choose 0 and guarantee that you don't, though that also guarantees that everyone else gets to wheel away their hand, which maybe you don't want them to do, so maybe you should pick a higher number. Simultaneously, 1, 2, 3.
Oh,
Okay, well, now I look silly because I picked 10.
you picked 10.
I wanted new cards!
You definitely pick a low 10.
But I'm going...
Life is a resource for you to fumble away, I guess.
Here's a non-basic dual land that counts as an island and a mountain. But as it enters play, each player other than you flips a secret coin. You have to guess which players got heads and which got tails. For each incorrect answer, you take 2 damage. We call it Volcanicer Island. Many Magic the Gathering players don't think Wheel of Misfortune is that complicated, but those players are wrong. That's just conflating this card is easy to understand with I've finally memorized what this nonsense card does and know how to play with it now. As absurd as Wheel of Misfortune is, these last 2 cards on the list blow it out of the complexity water. Number 2 on the list is Tackle Maggot, an aura enchantment that costs 2 generic and 2 black mana. I'm going to be honest, I'm not looking forward to reading this card's oracle text for you, but because I care about you, I will do it. Enchant creature. At the beginning of the upkeep of enchanted creature's controller, put a -0, -1 counter on that creature. When enchanted creature dies, that creature's controller chooses a creature that Tackle Maggot could enchant. If the player does, return Tackle Maggot to the battlefield under your control attached to that creature. If they don't, return Tackle Maggot to the battlefield under your control as a non-aura enchantment. It loses enchant creature and gains at the beginning of that player's upkeep. Tackle Maggot deals 1 damage to that player. Where to begin? First of all, by today's standards, -0, -1 counters are ridiculous. But I suppose modern players might be used to this weird mechanic thanks to Wall of Roots. But let's put that aside for now. It's clear what this card does, sort of. At least to start, right? Tackle Maggot enchants a creature. That creature slowly gets less and less tough as turns pass, until it eventually dies. But now's when things start to get weird. The controller of the creature that just died now gets to pick a new victim for the enchantment. The creature they pick could be your creature, and in fact, it likely will be your creature if your opponent has that option. This doesn't target, by the way, so that player can choose a creature with Shroud or Hexproof, but not creatures with protection from black, because you can only choose creatures that Tackle Maggot can enchant. Anyway, the new creature loses a point of toughness every turn until it dies, and then its controller gets to pick a new creature for Tackle Maggot to return to the battlefield enchanting. If a creature enchanted by Tackle Maggot ever dies, and there are no remaining legal targets on the battlefield that Tackle Maggot could enchant, then Tackle Maggot returns to play as a non-aura enchantment. Here's the part that's most confusing about the card. Yes, that's right, we're not even at the most confusing part. Tackle Maggot then loses enchant creature. So that text and the triggered ability that mentions an enchanted creature basically go away. All that remains is the ability that it gained. Quote unquote, at the beginning of that player's upkeep, Tackle Maggot deals 1 damage to that player. Tell me, friends, which player is that player exactly? Well, you have to go back to the beginning of the paragraph of text. When enchanted creature dies, that creature's controller chooses a creature that Tackle Maggot could enchant. Therefore, that player who takes a damage on their upkeep is the player who controlled the most recent creature to die to the Tackle Maggot. No matter who that player is, the original controller of Tackle Maggot remains the controller of Tackle Maggot. But the player who is dealt damage by Tackle Maggot could be any player. It all depends on who last had a creature enchanted by Tackle Maggot. Note that it's that creature's controller, not that creature's owner. If the creature that died to Tackle Maggot was controlled by a player other than its owner, then Tackle Maggot still deals its damage to the player who controlled it, not the player who owned it. Got it? No? Good. Wait. Wow, what a complicated card, but there is one card even more complicated than Tackle Maggot. At first glance, you might not believe that the number 1 most complicated card is as complicated as I'm claiming it is, but I promise you, it is. The most complicated card on our list today is Humility. Really, you ask? Yes, Humility is one of the most complicated cards in Magic the Gathering. An unassuming enchantment for 2 generic and 2 white mana, Humility has a very simple set of rules text. Just 1 line, in fact. All creatures lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1. Imagine, let's say, you have a Humility in play and your opponent casts Ragavan for its dash cost. Question, can the Ragavan attack this turn? What if they cast Maximize Velocity on it? Either way, does the Ragavan then return to your opponent's hand on their end step? Or how about this? You have a Humility in play alongside a Temple Garden, a Breeding Pool, a Hollowed Fountain, and a Reflecting Pool. Your opponent casts Magus of the Moon. Are your lands mountains? What if you then play a basic forest and then cast Dryad of the Elysian Grove? Another one, because I love giving myself a headache. Say I have a Painter's Servant on red in play. You cast Humility. On my turn, I cast Vesuvius Vesuvian doppelganger? Do I get to copy my painter's servant? On my next upkeep, can I choose a new creature to copy? If I do, will that matter? I can make things worse. What if I have a humility in play and then cast opalescence? What if I then activate my mirage mirror and target my opalescence? In order to understand how these continuous effects stack up and which ones get priority when, you first need to understand layers. Layers dictate how and when continuous effects are applied. There are a variety of different continuous effects. Copy effects, control changing effects, text changing effects, type changing effects, color changing effects, ability granting and ability removing effects, and power and/or toughness changing effects. According to the layer system, continuous effects are applied in descending order from layer 1. Copy effects down to layer 7, power and/or toughness altering effects. Now, there's a bit of an added layer of complexity once you get to power and toughness changing effects. Layer 7 is the only layer to have sub-layers. Sub-layers are applied in the same way that regular layers are applied, descending order from sublayer 7A through sublayer 7E. For the sake of comprehension, these might as well be layers 7 through 11, but because all these sublayers have to do with power and toughness, they get lumped together under the single banner of layer 7. Layers mean any card with a continuous effect that applies before layer 6, ability removing effects, will still have that ability even with a humility in play. Any effect that applies after layer 6 will no longer work. If two continuous effects are applied at the same layer, then timestamps dictate which ability takes precedence, with the most recent card cast having priority. While there are a number of Magic the Gathering cards that deal in layers, such as Oko, Thief of Crowns, and Dress Down, humility is overall one of the most grievous offenders, and thus, despite it only having a single line of rules text, is indeed one of the most complicated cards in Magic the Gathering. Armed with this handy layers chart, you should be able to determine the answer to all the hypothetical scenarios I laid out a moment ago, but do you really want to? Alright, let's do one of them. Let's talk about one of our scenarios from earlier involving the Painter's Servant and Humility. Since Painter's Servant's effect is a color-changing effect, it applies on layer 5 before Humility removes abilities on layer 6, which means every spell would continue to be red in addition to its other colors. When we cast Vesuvian Doppelganger and have it enter as a copy of Painter's Servant, not only would Vesuvian's copy ability not be affected by Humility, since that applies on layer 1, but you would also get to pick an additional color with the copied painter's effect. Things get fun once we make it to layer 6, however, since the Vesuvian Doppelganger's triggered ability, which allows you to copy another creature each upkeep, gets shut off by Humility. By the time we make it to layer 7, both the painter and the Vesuvian Doppelganger will be 1/1s, and the latter won't trigger on your upkeep. But hey now, every spell is red and another color in addition to its other colors. But that's just the solution to one of the situations I presented with you a moment ago. Still don't think humility is that complex of a card? See if you can figure out the other examples and then get back to me. And so, despite having just one line of rules text, I believe humility is one of, if not the most complicated card in all of Magic the Gathering. But now I want to hear from you. What cards do you think are some of the most complex in all of Magic's history? Don't say Chains of Mephistopheles or Charizard or Animate Dead just because it's wordy and overdone templating, but truly complex, complicated effects. Tell me in the comments below. And be sure to check out our videos on the very best and the very worst mechanics in Magic history, as these are some mechanics that never were used a second time, but are either really, really good or really, really bad. And remember, it is possible for you to learn how to code and program just like you learned how to play Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering is a game, and in playing and enjoying it, you are able to figure out complex systems. Well, coding and programming, it's the same if there's a game, and now there is. It's boot.dev. Interested in learning Python and Go all while playing a game? Check out boot.dev by clicking the link below and using my code Bellerin to get 25% off your first payment for boot.dev. So instead of remembering the best cards from the most recent set, you can remember actual valuable skills. Thank you, boot.dev, for sponsoring this video.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Pro players play Commander. I have brought here 3 esteemed and established pro players. I went through social media for the receipts. I have built each of you a Commander deck that I think you're gonna love and enjoy.
I am Cedric Phillips. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
My name is Jim Davis.
Done
I know
to
he's
you.
falling apart over here.
Just doesn't know what the cards do.
You can
I'll
only
take
get
that one.
Minsk and Boo, but
That's-
not
that's
Boo.
the- I'll take
Just
that
want to
as
be
well.
clear that you're getting
The
Minsk
red-green
and
Planeswalker.
Boo.
Council's Judgment.
What if I just named Rock?
Okay.
He's gonna.
Do you want to do that over? We will, right, guys?
This is so made up.
This is this is not Silver Border.
I feel like this is I'm being punked basically.